Hi everybody, welcome back. It's Valentine's Day here on campus. Lots going on. Today we'll talk about something everyone loves to hate, and we'll see if I can stop dragging the curtain around. They actually have this room set up so that you could stand and write on the board, but I've generally been against that. I mean, I stand and write on the board in lots of classrooms, but TV, it seems a little weird. It's just, you never look as good on television as you think. Okay, so inventory, asset cost generator, source of endless discussion. Anytime you want to aggravate someone in a corporate setting, mention inventory. Should get an excellent response. Not the doing of inventory as in the counting, although that'll really light up people. Occasionally, as a result of doing our physical inventory of capital equipment, I've had encounters with people where I pointed out that it would cost me money to get rid of this stuff. Who cares if I find it? And I got a lecture about the taxpayers. And, hey, the taxpayers would think you're an idiot too. But that only led to another lecture. Today, inventory. Tomorrow, production, right? What we'll talk about, inventory, what is it, inventory costs, some characteristics of how people model inventory. Static demand, stochastic demand for our friends in IE who like that stuff, and how people implement models. Inventory is a big deal, mostly because you spend money on it and it does the wrong thing for you. Example, famous example, makes me laugh every time I think of it. Every so often we buy some number of polo shirts embroidered with the NM State logo and industrial engineering. I have 3 or 4 of them floating around in different sizes, mostly because I haven't changed size, but they come in and the mediums are smaller than they were and the larges are too big and that kind of thing, right? Everybody knows that with polo. In any event, we have 2 left from the last purchase, which was several years ago. For whatever reason, we bought a bunch of women's models. And we have 2 women's larges that have been sitting there for some time. I've been suggesting we buy new ones, and of course that hasn't fully worked out yet, because that would require ordering them, which is costly, as we will find out. But in any event, they're sitting there, and every time I see them, I just laugh. Because I think, what do we do with a couple of women's larges? Since at the moment, and invariably, the reason why we went to women's sizes for some of them was we had a number of kids who were ambassadors who were kind of like any of the unisex size ones looked way too long on. So we said, all right, we're going to be smart about this. We're going to buy some women's sizes. Then, of course, we sort of divvied up how many of each size to buy, which is a real problem, by the way. It sounds like I'm telling a story, but having the right sizes in stock is a big problem. Because if you need a women's large and you don't have one, wearing a men's large is not at all flattering. And it doesn't work well as a sales tool, right? People don't even buy people the right size shirt, and so on. So, any event, we'll think about that. And before we get too far into this, our good friends in the Institute of Industrial and Systems Engineers chapter asked me to remind everyone there's a meeting Wednesday, tomorrow, 5:30 in the lounge. They're also, they allege they're running a bake sale tomorrow in an attempt to go to the regional conference at Oregon State in Corvallis, which they better be selling an awful lot of cupcakes, right? But apparently they're hitting the department for some of that. Well, any event, we'll look forward to all of you buying cupcakes, right? Okay, cookies. A year or so ago, they got really into it, and they had some really cool Valentine's models. I took a picture and put it on Instagram. So, okay, assignment 1 is available since Friday. I got some feedback that the scans of the chapters didn't look good, but I'll take advice on that because I looked at the scans and they look pretty readable to me. So if you needed them, otherwise use your textbook. But given the array of textbook buying strategies around this class, and the thing that might not be obvious to everyone is there's 94 people taking this class. There's 44 at the 424 level, and or 98, I forget. 54, 40, and 54. There's a lot. So there's an array of textbook strategies out there, including, I don't have to read that thing, which is not the recommended version. Okay? Couple of questions. I did get one question so far about the one problem with Bios Global Industries and the 15% forecast. That number might be usable, might not be. It might be worth thinking about whether the breakdown matches up with a 15% of the different flavors of lip balm. So that's the one question I got so far, so I thought I'd share that. You might think about whether that 15% even works. Or maybe they just made a boo-boo, as I like to point out occasionally. Maybe they just assumed that, and it turned out to be wrong. All right, so inventory. You could spend the rest of your career and several other people's on inventory, but we'll talk about it in a couple of classes. Endless barrels of ink and electrons and pieces of paper have been spent trying to figure this out. This is a little tough to read. It's an asset. If you took accounting, then you know inventory's an asset until it's not. So, for example, my two women's large polo shirts hanging out near the copier, they're an asset of sorts. Although they could be obsolete. What would make them obsolete? Probably nothing in this case, but if NMSU suddenly did a rebranding effort, they could become obsolete. Famously, I don't know, 15 years ago, 12 years ago, NMSU went through a rebranding exercise. And we went away from the logo that they thought was the official logo to a new logo, and then they designed the new Pistol Pete, which caused the older alumni no end of aggravation. And suddenly, like, all the business cards and stationery and everything were out of style. So I have happened to be on that committee, and I said, why don't we issue an edict that says use up existing stock? And everyone says, but that will dilute the message. And I said, yeah, but everyone will be mad if they have to buy new stuff. Why don't we go with that? So we still have plenty of the old style stuff around. More importantly, if you're building some kind of technology-based equipment, like, for example, PCs, if you have too many microprocessors that are down rev, what do you do with them? That's a problem, right? They're not much of an asset if you got a bunch of motherboards for the old computer. Now it's a headache, right? It's obsolete, potentially. Cell phones. Good example, right? They're changing all the time. They're obsolete before you pay them off, right? Different kind of problem. Okay, so the key thing to get from this, besides the definition, is American Production Inventory Control Society, APICS. The people who tend to control these discussions from the production side as opposed to the accounting side. They have what's called an Operations Management Book of Knowledge. With the onset of internet-based stuff, you can have books of knowledge that aren't books. You just look it up online. So the OMBOK is not some sort of strange animal, an ombak, right? Operations Management Book of Knowledge. There's also for those of you that are fans of systems engineering, there's a CBOK out there for Systems Engineering Book of Knowledge. These are strange animals out there, right? Okay, so inventory, stuff we make into stuff, right? We buy steel, we apply energy and things to it, and we get a cut part. Sound good? Now we have a more valuable piece of hardware, or a less valuable piece of hardware, as we will find out. Maybe we have scrap, right? Maintenance, repair, and operating supplies. Those are the things that keep your factory or whatever moving. Even down to what goes into restrooms, soap, towels, paper, all that stuff. That's out of stock, that causes problems too in your facility. So, in theory, the way your little firm works is you design something that you're going to do, and you purchase some raw materials or piece parts, and you do something to them, right? You add labor in the form of assembly, machining, what have you, and now you have, ta-da, a finished good to sell. Or, for example, if you prefer, you buy cotton material, cut it up, sew it together, dye it. Now you have t-shirts to sell, or jeans, or what have you. That's what happens. Now, say you make something like jeans. Even people like Levi's and Wrangler, who are fairly standardized products, have quite a few variants, don't they? For example, with the coming of spring fashions comes new jeans. Funny thing, you could have made those just by maybe riding a dirt bike for a few hours and then not washing the jeans, right? They instead did that for you. How many of those do they make? How many in what sizes and so forth? Now, if you are going out to buy jeans, for example, these are an easy example. Some jeans you can only get in one length. Others come in whatever length inseam you like, which creates a whole nother production problem. So inventory for anybody is a big deal. A few weeks ago we had a career fair. One of the things that was of interest to the recruiters is how many IEs do I have graduating? Why? They're looking to fill X number of positions. I have a stock of Y people. Do they need to go to 5 more schools? Do they need to, can they hire everyone they need here? It's another inventory decision. So when we think about inventory, we think about how do we facilitate what we're doing with stuff. So even if you have a 3D prototyper making all your parts, without, guess what? Those little reels of plastic in the correct color, and the parts to repair the prototyper because they tend to break down, you are going to not make parts. Ideally, we would not like to have a lot of stuff around. But as we will see, that may or may not be possible. So, some reasons for having inventory. Fixed costs, or setting up the machine. In days of yore, when machine setups could take a long time, you had to take the machine out of business for a while, right? So you couldn't say, like, make it sit idle for 6 hours at $50 an hour and then make one 3-cent part, right? You make a lot of parts. What that does is essentially decouples production. So if I have enough stuff around, I can just keep going for a while. And it lets me smooth and stabilize things. If I know I'm making a week's worth of stuff, nice and easy. I can sell my finished goods immediately, right? Because we all know the goal of all this stuff is to sell a thing. So if you don't sell a thing, no cash flow, you don't get paid. Life is not good. having raw materials around, production begins smoother. You could even use the basics of the undergrad apartment for this. Example, tonight would be a great night for pizza. You have lots of options. You could, A, choose from one of the many vendors of pizza. B, make it yourself because you like cooking and you're an expert. Sound good so far? You want to make pizza, what's in it? You need some dough, right? Sauce, cheese, spices. You could, for example, buy a pre-made pizza crust. Or you could make dough yourself. If you're going to make dough, you need some in-process inventory, because you can't get home at, say, 6 tonight and whip up a batch of dough and make pizza by the time you're hungry. Can you? You need in-process inventory. But you could just as easily buy pizza, correct? If you and your colleagues didn't buy pizza, there wouldn't be all those vendors out there, right? But conceptually, you want to think about it, even something like pizza sauce can be broken down into I buy a jar or a can versus I make it myself from raw materials. Then I can go further back in the supply chain and say maybe I need to grow my own custom tomatoes and custom spices, correct? It's entirely possible. You could even try making your own mozzarella. Now, before you think I'm just blathering, think about it carefully. Do you have the skills to be good at all those things? No, right? Could somebody be a really good mozzarella maker? Excellent, right? Vendor. Correct? In fact, it might surprise you to know one of the largest suppliers of pizza cheese is actually in Clovis, Southwest Cheese. They've occasionally been down here recruiting. If you're an artisan cheese maker in some other setting, you could do that. All of this is possible, down to letting someone else worry about everything and calling one of the many places or getting on your iPhone or Android phone and using the app to order. All of them are choices. Which one is the correct choice? Might be worth thinking about. Okay, so now that I've ruined pizza for everyone forever, no one ever thinks about it the same way when I go through one of those pizzas. Like, oh man, I just wanted to buy a slice. I didn't want a lecture. So, when we think about it, we also, I could reduce risk with inventory. Uncertainties, have enough stuff around. I know I'd like pizza, so I buy a couple extra pre-baked shells. Stick them in the freezer. It's entirely possible. Then, of course, in light of what's called a speculative inventory, those of you that are battery fans know lithium is something that people use a lot of, so you see some of that. If you listen to various talk radio channels, there'll always be someone ranting about gold. Like, keep gold in your house as a hedge against the hordes. And he said, we'll leave that to some other class, but certainly these commercials exist. Invest in gold. You know, you could increase inventory from a supplier if they expect a work stoppage. And the unions are less a part of the economy than they used to be, but certainly we've seen work stoppages affect inventory before and will again. We could buy in advance of a price increase. Every so often somebody points to the famous Southwest Airlines story where they bought some amount of jet fuel futures in advance and turned out to be geniuses because there was a shock in the jet fuel market and they got to buy it way cheaper. They had contracts to buy the stuff. So, you know, if, for example, someone is raising the price on a good you use a lot of, you might buy extra. Keep it around. Next year, tuition will go higher. This year, take 21 credits, right? That kind of thing. Okay. We divide inventory up into three types. Cycling inventory, this is stuff we use. Our parts, our thread, or whatever. Pizza products. Then there's what's called safety stock. That would be extra to reduce uncertainty. What would be an example of safety stock? Definitely not 2 polo shirts hanging out. That's not safety stock. That's just poor decision making in who was going to wear shirts. Safety stock would be like having, I don't know, say you change your own oil. You buy a case instead of 5 cans. Keep it around it's cheaper. Now what do you do with it though? You got to have a place to put it, right? And you got to remember where you put it and all that sort of thing. Now, when I turn it into a pizza or a case of oil, it sounds pretty trivial, right? Say, wow, I could outplan that. And I say, of course, we don't need this concept for that. That's just an example. Imagine, say, you're now working for, I don't know, Intel. Intel can't afford to shut down because they don't have the raw materials they need. Or say in days of yore, when steel mills were very popular, when they got going, you didn't turn them off, because heating them up to temperature, you just kept making stuff till they stopped making it, whatever it was. Last thing, speculative inventory is like the idea of buying stuff in advance of a price increase, or because you think you can sell it, or what have you. Typically, we're interested in this and safety stock in this class. The reason we're interested in these two is these are fundamental to our business. We make things. Whether we make t-shirts, frozen pizzas, aircraft, we need supplies to make it. If you want an example of being out of stock, don't use something like I forgot to buy something at the supermarket. Consider the last time the electric power went out. There's a whole lot of things you can't do, right? You suddenly discover that your furnace has electric ignition, and your water heater has, right? And wait a minute, there's no light. That's a stock out. And see, you know, obviously, because this class is a big mix of people, it's easy to use an example like buying cereal. But it's hard to think of that as like a life-changing event, right? On the other hand, say the electricity goes out for 5 hours. That's pretty disruptive, isn't it? You can't even drive, right? Because all of the traffic lights are out. That's disruptive, and that's the kind of thing we're interested in solving with safety stock. Speculative inventory is for my friends over in finance, because we don't do a lot of speculating in this class, but it does exist as a concept. So when we talk about cost now of inventory, stuff we buy to do our thing, as soon as I buy something, I can't use the money for something else. I have taxes and insurance. Things go wrong, right? They get broken, they spoil, their shelf life people steal it. It goes obsolete. And I have to do what? Put it somewhere, right? Therefore, I have to store it, and I have to store it so I can find it. Minor detail, right? When I order it, I have to know to order it. I have to find a vendor. Vendor benchmarking. Who's the best vendor? Who could that be? shipping costs. There's paperwork associated with receiving the thing and all that. And even if you're using all barcode, you still have to have the barcode wand, and the software has to work, and everybody has to be trained. The process has to work, as we would say in a quality class. The stuff has to do what? Get from where you receive it, get checked out. Did they send you the right thing? That can be quite disappointing, right? You get the wrong thing, it doesn't work when you get it. You have to check all that out, and now you have to do something with it. Put it somewhere. Now, again, examples can be whatever, but this is not a trivial task. If you're, say, working at, I don't know, Intel, Raytheon, Ethicon, any of these places that hire our grads. Even construction companies have headaches with inventory. Right? Every time they're doing construction on campus, the first thing you see is a big fenced-in area that gets built for the stuff. Right? And construction materials have a habit of being popular for, shall we say, other uses other than the intended ones, right? Hey, great, just what I was looking for, wallboard, right? No one will notice me taking these. Okay, I'm not suggesting I'm taking wallboard. I'm certainly not looking for any, but you could imagine that happening. Or plumbing supplies, right? You have to maintain control of your inventory. And it has to be the right stuff and so forth. When I think about inventory costs, then those are real costs. What's called shortage or stockout costs are important. One, if you don't have it, you can't sell it. If you go into a store that doesn't have what you want, you eventually do what? Find another store, right? People can run out of material and shut the production down. That's been known to happen. Now, what do you do with all the people who work for you? They go home, potentially, and you pay them anyway. It depends on the arrangements at your employer, but kind of a problem, isn't it? There's also what's called back ordering. And that's when you wait for a product to arrive. You may have experienced a back order just placing a web order, right? Recently, I was thinking, I saw a sale on the brand of golf shirts that I like. I saw one I liked. It was like end of season closeout, and it turns out the thing's on back order. I said, wait a minute, what kind of closeout is this? Who knows, maybe they had ordered them and they had ordered too many and they put it on sale and they ran out and they had another shipment coming in a week. But now what do it ruins your reputation with your customer, right? What else does it do? It creates costs of managing the back order, right? Even with the internet and web-based ordering, you still got to deal with it. You may incur extra shipping costs and things like that. Because even the sites that charge you for shipping won't charge you for a back order. They hit you for the one shipping cost, and they have to eat the back order and hope that their cost model accounts for all the back orders they generated. There are also hidden costs when we talk about inventory. If you know your vendors are unreliable, what do? Order more. If you order more, you've got to pay for it. Same thing here. Machine breaks down a lot, you're going to make more. People take off. This is hard to visualize, but say you order something and it will be delivered in 6 months. You might order extra in hopes that you won't have to wait another 6 months. Now, the example from when we buy the polo shirts, the IE department is not like a multi-zillion-dollar operation, right? So, say we buy a box of polo shirts for people who do things like ambassadors and that kind of thing. Now, the people in the class who've been ambassadors, they almost always ask you, what size are you, when they order it, right? And you better hope that their interpretation of size at the manufacturer is consistent with yours, right? Alternatively, what could we do? We could order a whole bunch of things, right? Now we have the problem of what sizes do we buy, right? How many XLs are we using? How many larges? How many mediums? If we need, we discovered by accident the kinds of polo shirts that we buy are called unisex size, because they're like regular polo shirts. And we discovered by accident that we need, actually accident and observation, we needed to buy some, what they call a ladies model. And how we found this out was we had a couple of undergrads who were not big people, and you give them like a unisex small and it was too long to wear. So we figured out we had to buy, because people look foolish, they don't want to wear the shirt, right? Seems fair. I mean, it's not like a reflection on anything other than you want to look like you belong in the shirt, so to speak, right? I mean, I'm not wearing any triple XLs. Why would I expect someone to wear something that's the equivalent of what a triple X would look on me, right? So, any event, we end up buying all this stuff, and now we have this box of polos, and what comes out of this? Well, some people, what was a popular size? Men's, medium, and large, right? We ran out of men's, medium, and or the unisex, medium, and large right away. And we even tried to get people to forecast their size. Which if you're in an IE department, that would work, right? Nah. Now, why am I telling you this story? The reality is, besides it's funny and it enlivens this a little, the point is, how do you order this stuff is a big problem, because if you order wrong, you have a bunch of stuff you paid for that isn't helping anybody and is occupying space and so forth. And also you have a bunch of people who don't have your product because you didn't order enough of whatever. If you want, we could make this an iPhone example. When my wife and I got iPhones, she wanted the rose gold one. They had to get one from their store elsewhere. They were out of stock. Is that the end of the world? No. But imagine now you're dealing in not one order, but 1,000 or 100,000 people. Now you've got a problem, right? It costs money. Okay, so everything costs money, and that definitely is not good, because the more you spend, the less you have to spend. Okay, this is not a Dave Ramsey class on personal finance, by the way. I make no observations about how people do inventory control, other than if you order the wrong thing, you won't have money to buy the right thing, and it'll cost you more to deal with it. What you do with it is up to you. We also look at two kinds of demand as we're looking at this, and we say there is independent demand, which would be like your finished goods, cars, airplanes. If I make polo shirts, then I forecast models of polo shirt, correct? If I do that, then what's a dependent variable in that? The material and thread that goes into the shirt. Same thing with an aircraft or a car, as I point out here. If your car needs an engine, you only need to make a very few more engines than cars. How you order tires from Michelin or Goodyear or whomever you order them from has a lot to do with how many cars you're going to make. Otherwise, what do you need tires for, right? If you're not making the cars or the aircraft, you don't need the tires. So that's called dependent demand. The major difference is this. I can forecast independent demand, and I can calculate dependent demand. So, for example, if I make computers, computers have power supplies, right? How many more power supplies would I need than computers? Could I envision ordering more? Yes. Why would I do that? Spare parts? Quality problems? But every power supply I build that isn't installed or sold as a spare is doing what? Taking up space. And now you have parts plus labor sitting there doing absolutely nothing for you. So when I think about this, I can forecast the products I make and the spares I'll need, and then I can calculate what I need to make. When I do that now, I have the problem of how many do I do at a time? And because faculty have spent a lot of time on this problem, there is, in many textbooks, there's an endless discussion of inventory review policy. Here's an inventory problem. This morning before class, Sarah was dealing with something called Aggie office supply. She was ordering, she asked me, do I need anything? That's a review policy. I thought about it a minute. I said, no. She said, great. And then she said, look at this. If I order whiteboard markers in black, they're $17.98 for a dozen, and in blue, they're $18.02, and in red, they're $18.20. I said, wow, I guess we should tell people to write in black, right? She said, I wonder why. I said, I suppose I could concoct an explanation since I teach this class, but let's just assume something odd happened and leave it at that. But that's a review policy. What could I really do? Every so often I could look at, what do I need of something? Do I need parts? Do I need raw materials? Do I need thread? Whatever I buy. Or I could have continuous analysis with variable time intervals, fixed order quantities, do all kinds of things. What are we doing? We have a thing that we make, and we need parts and raw materials for it. When I say parts, by the way, and raw material, usually I think of raw materials as things like steel bars, aluminum bars, that kind of thing. Parts are either like electronic parts or mechanical parts like a motor. They might go into a sub-assembly that goes into a final assembly, that kind of thing. When I think about it, I can make one-time decisions. I can make various things. It happens that today is a great day to discuss perishable products. Why is that? It's Valentine's Day. What's a perishable product? If somebody made chocolate-covered strawberries, how long will they last? Here's a better question. If you bring home a box of chocolate-covered strawberries tomorrow, which is the day after Valentine's Day, the perception of the gift will be different. Correct? We can all visualize that, right? It's like forgetting someone's birthday. You show up with the card the day after, you're just not as cool. Face it, right? Okay. So in any event, what's perishable? Flowers, food. Epoxy is perishable. If you think about a process that you deal with a two-part epoxy, how long does that last? Not very, right? And by the time you use two-part epoxy again, you'll have to go back to Home Depot and buy a no tube, right? No matter, even if you store it properly, you almost always end up buying more. But today's a perfect day for discussing perishable items because Valentine's Day has a lot of perishable flowers. Forecasting demand for flowers would be, and you'll make so many bouquet assemblies. Takes the romance out of it, doesn't it? Somebody sitting there going, well, how many of this style bouquet assembly will we make? But fundamentally, that's what's going on, right? Now, leaving chocolate-covered strawberries, I just happened to mention that because one of the groups over in Ag was selling them. You had to pick them up yesterday, which made sense because, why? Because if you picked them up yesterday, you had them for the holiday, right? Okay. I was supposed to mention someone else was selling Valentine's things with double E mugs. I don't know how popular those were except with people who are in the EE department, but we'll leave that to the buyer. Imagine, if you will, you work for Raytheon and you're in charge of printed circuit board assembly. Well, then you're interested in the boards and the parts, and you've got to order them, correct? Or even on campus, the innovation space has to have plastic. When do you order it? We ran out, let's order more, is probably not a good policy. You would have to develop one based on the needs of the business. And for example, the innovation space tends to get busy prototyping near the end of the semester. Often people get into it more, so one possible strategy would be to order more in advance to have it for the rush. What am I suggesting there? Modeling is important, process expertise is critical. Right? You got to know what you're modeling. Now, the most famous model of all time is economic order quantity. It turns out that the order policy you're most familiar with is piece for piece, which is I need one, I buy one. Right? That makes sense. You're also familiar with maybe buying a week's worth of products. You go to a grocery store weekly, you buy a week's worth of things, or you could buy some unit of measure, a box of cereal. You can't really buy one serving of cereal, right? You could buy those little things they have in like the hotels, but not cost effective. Cheaper to buy a box. It's very popular. After that, people started thinking about economic modeling, and the answer that has been derived over time is what's called an EOQ. What to order and when to order it. It's an independent demand kind of thing, as we'll see, and you can review it all the time. This is a deterministic kind of thing. And to show it graphically, here's what goes on. We assume we use up the inventory in a linear fashion. And based on our costs, we calculate a reorder point. No matter how fancy our graph, the story remains the same. The sawtooth is a nice example, though, right? We use up the stuff and we reorder. There's a certain amount of lead time till the reorder comes in, and then boom, we instantly have more stuff. Then we use it up, boom, we reorder. Here, it arrives here, we're instantly restocked. Now, for people who are wondering, yes, you can change the model to include the fact that you don't instantly restock and all that. But at this point, why don't we just assume life works perfectly? It helps with the derivation. So, for example, imagine I'm forecasting looking at inventory of some product I sell. What I might do is do what? How long does it take me to get the new stuff? And what does it cost me to have this much stuff hanging out here and using it up relatively slowly? And you'll be pleased to know you can do that with an equation. And look, there's even a Greek letter, tau. The basic EOQ assumes constant demand. It has a holding cost for keeping the thing around, H, a fixed order cost. It doesn't allow shortages. You can get fancier, but let's go with this one. Has a constant known lead time. And the items come in one big lump. And we can calculate we have in our friendly textbook all the definitions you could ever want. But fundamentally, they use K, they use H, and let me direct your attention to Chapter 4. And I meant to write down this page, but didn't, as usual. The fixed cost, K, is the setup cost. The lambda is the usage, the H is the holding cost, and this is on page 210 to 11 for your reading enjoyment. It's a convex function. Sounds like they're going to burst into a derivative. In another kind of class, we proved this. I don't see any point to that since they've already automated this unbelievably. So in theory, order cost, usage, holding cost, boom. In theory, we hit 0 at the end of the order cycle, and then we instantly replenish. Everyone says, what? I say, well, run with it for now. Think about it. Could we instantly replenish? Answer, no. Would we want to? Yeah, it would be great, wouldn't it? What would be ideal? What would be truly ideal would be just in time, where we go towards n equals 1. We need 1, we do 1. But we'll save that for another day. The inventory level should hit 0, which helps you calculate a reorder point. What's happening? I want to do what? Minimize the cost of keeping things around, correct? Because if you go back to this schematic, what's my problem with this queue? I got to have a place to keep queue items, and then I have to use them up in a constant way for this to work, right? If I got an order quantity of 100, I have to have a place for 100 and use them up over the period at a constant rate, correct? Which, if we're thinking about, I don't know, something the size of computer motherboards, not a big deal, right? So if we're the size of transformers for a utility, that's, you know, kind of a different story. Okay, so any event, what it does is take our order cost, our purchase cost, and our holding cost. The holding cost Q over 2 over the period. This is to order it, the cost of each order, the number of demands, the quantity, it's the actual cost of the item. So what you get is this kind of thing, where you're looking for the minimum point on a cost curve. Because as your quantity goes up, what happens? The cost of keeping it around goes, boom, up, right? As my quantity goes up, my cost for ordering goes down, right? Because most of the costs associated with ordering are relatively fixed, right? So if I order a lot of things, who cares, right? If I order a few things, who cares? It doesn't matter. The cost gets applied across the number of items we order. So if you think about Sarah with the board pens, if I order 1,000 pens, or I think you bought them by the dozen. If I ordered 1,000 dozen pens, the ordering cost would be way low, right? Dr. Valles and Sohn could write for 1,000 years and not use up 1,000 gross of pens, or dozen pens rather, right? Those pens would be long dried out before we'd use them up, but it would be very cheap to order them, right? Plus, where do I stick them? Right? My holding cost just went way out of the ceiling, right? It burst right through this roof of EC3, my holding cost, right? But my ordering costs went way down. Now, we use economic order quantity for our whiteboard pens. Answer, that would be foolish in my case. If I were the vendor, I might be able to use it. If I were Aggie Office Supply, I could figure out on average how many orders do I get and come up with an economic order quantity. Of course, now, for you guys, there's some ERP system that'll just calculate everything for you. You just need to have data that's actually accurate about your holding costs and so forth. But if you consider something like the whiteboard pens, what would you really do? If you were running an IE department, you'd say, who needs whiteboard pens? And you buy what you need, kind of piece for piece, right? If you were the office supply company, you might try to figure out what does it cost you to order them, bring them in, where do you stick them. This might work, right? Because what you want to do is reduce your total cost of having it around. Now, the reason why whiteboard pens are a good example, besides they happen to occur to me this morning, is that too many of them is not good because they can go bad. They dry out over time, which makes my holding cost even higher, right? Because if I have to add kind of a risk premium to the holding costs for shelf life. Now, if you want another example of who would really be doing this kind of inventory study, imagine you work for, say, drugstore.com. They have lots of items, right? They need essentially a good analytics program to help them figure out trends, right? Because imagine you buy something like, I don't know, Aquaphor. It has a shelf life sticker on it, right? It comes in a variety of sizes, correct? I was astonished. I happened to buy some this weekend because the giant tub I had bought had expired 2 years ago. So I go over to Target. It's like 8 sizes of it in Target. And I'm thinking, it's interesting. How do they forecast that? And the answer is they have much better analytics than we're talking about. But this is a very basic level way to look at it. But fundamentally, the more it costs me to hold on to the thing, the greater my cost of having it around. The up goes my cost, and down goes my gross revenue, which is never what we hope for. We're out of time. I'll see you next time. If you have questions on the homework, write in. Have a good day, everyone.